the comments. Okay. This is today's agenda. So, okay, we are now at 8:05. So I'm going to introduce our, what Women Who Code, what we do, and our speakers. Then we'll begin the panel at 8:15, and hopefully we are done by 9, and then you're free to ask your questions to the panelists. If you don't, we also have questions from when you can also ask those questions as well during this section. And finally, we hope to wrap up by 9:20 p.m. All right. So as what Kim has been reminding everyone in the chat, feel free to use the chat to post comments or post questions you have. And who knows, we may actually pick it up and use it during this panel session. All right. For those who are unfamiliar with us, okay, we are Women Who Code. We are the local network Kuala Lumpur. And our mission is to inspire women to excel in technology careers. So this is an international nonprofit organization, and we are part of over 200 networks, and it's growing. Okay, so these are some of the sessions by the Kuala Lumpur network. So on last count, we've organized, we started in 2014, and we've organized over 100 workshops or sharing sessions like today's session. And yeah, and assisted in such programs. In fact, we have another workshop coming up this Saturday. So if you're interested in learning about SQL, you can check that out. All right, so now I'd like to introduce our wonderful speakers. So first up, we have Sandrapriya. Okay, she is Senior Consultant at Ambition Malaysia. And she introduces herself as an experienced recruiter within the IT infrastructure, cybersecurity, information security, cloud and DevOps space in Malaysia. She places diversified candidates from mid-level to senior management. Okay, next up is Nigel. Oh, by the way, Sandra, can you just, yeah. All right, and then we have Nigel. Okay, so Nigel is the head of IT security of Ria Group Asia. He has over 16 years of working experience in different technology domains, and more than 14 years of experience in information or IT security. And finally, we have Rahayu. Okay, Rahayu leads the cyber strategy and architecture team within the largest cybersecurity team in Petronas. And after more than 16 years across roles in research, consulting, education, and oil and gas, when she's away from her screens, she can be found reading a hard copy book and drinking lots of coffee. So without much further ado, I would like to, I guess the first question is, I would like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about how you ended up where you are today. Because I'm sure we all love to know how you ended up working in cybersecurity or in a field related to it. So maybe, Sandra, you can go first.
Okay, sure. Hello, everyone. Good evening. And thanks for taking your time today to join us. So basically, I have 10 years of experience. I think Jessica have given a very quick introduction on myself. And I started in my career as a sales for corporate events in Marcus Evans, and then moved up to a financial services industry, an affiliate under Bank Negara as a business development and marketing manager. And then was there for another 3+ years and moved on to recruitment. I took a career switch from business development and marketing, and moved on to recruitment, talking about people, compared to selling products, and started talking about people and placing people in technology division. And I've been specializing within cybersecurity, as what I've mentioned earlier. It's a beautiful journey. And I'm quite satisfied with where I am right now, meeting a lot of, we call cybersecurity warriors in Malaysia, getting to know what they do, how they, bring force to fight all these issues that we are facing in the digital space. So yeah, so I'm quite excited to know more about Nigel and Rahayu as well. So I'll pass it over to both of them now. Thanks.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thanks for being here. My name is Nigel, and I've been with technology as a whole for like around 16 years or so, and with security around 14 years. My start wasn't really with security. Along the way, I did move into security, but I did know I wanted to be in security. When I started off with customer support, but technical areas of customer support, moved into tech support, and from there I got into application development, graduated with programming as my background, moved into networks. Once I got familiar with networks, then I started moving into network security. I did a lot of network security at a bank for around 4.5 years or so. After that, I wanted to move out of operations and the whole hands-on technology and look into, say, management side of things or the governance risk compliance side of things and the infosec areas. So from there, I moved into projects and overlooking security projects. Then I taken up a role again, more on risk and compliance at a bank. After which I moved to Malaysia for around 5 years. I've been with REA Group, and yeah, for the past 5 years, I've been looking over different domains or different areas of security. So it would be application security, cloud security, endpoint security, mobile security. So kind of wear different hats as and when there's a need. That's about from my side. I think I'll hand over to Raha.
Thanks, Nigel. And thanks, Jessica, for the introduction earlier. And welcome, everybody. Happy Hump Day. I realize it's Wednesday and we're smack in the middle of the week. So I hope you've had a good week so far. I have been in technology for about 16 plus years, for pretty much the entirety of my career, but doing really different things. I graduated with an engineering degree, came back, realized that nobody was doing the engineering that I had studied. So I went to consulting. And I stayed there for nearly 10 years. I did technology consulting the whole way through. Really great place to pick up very different aspects of technology, from software development cycles, change management, and just really learning about architecture in a very short amount of time. But anybody who's ever been in consulting probably knows that it's a bit soul sucking. So I left that and went to work in one of the large tech companies. Specifically looking at education. So I took the technology knowledge that I had and worked with the Ministry of Education to teach teachers how to apply technology in the classroom. Really eye-opening experience, probably something that got me really hooked on understanding how people interact with technology, right? And the influence that it has on our society, on our communities, and how it's both improving and also detrimental to our existence, right? And that's kind of what took me to my next role in Petronas. So I've actually been in Petronas for about 3 years. I started off in a team that was very new at the time. It's called digital adoption, and it was exactly what I had been doing in the previous role in terms of looking at how technology impacts digital transformation, how people pick up things like that. And one of the things I started doing was actually working very closely with the cybersecurity team, because we were trying to get onto a journey where we were operating as a secure organization, which is actually not inherently how most organizations operate, because it's not typically top of mind if you're trying to make money, right? So I actually joined the cybersecurity team only last year. So I've been in the team for less than a year, initially working with the business to understand what it is that they needed to do to secure their business. And I very recently moved into the strategy team for 2 reasons. One, to be able to bring that psychological aspect of security within an organization, right? Like, how do we help the organization to move forward where you're inherently secure versus just putting it as a top layer? And also to look at the bigger picture. Yeah, cybersecurity is one of those things where I think people and organizations are starting to realize is a constant thing. You don't just apply a security fix and then let it sit, right? The whole threat landscape is evolving. You really cannot afford to sit still. So it's a really exciting space to be in. So happy to share experience and also thoughts around how you can get into that space. So yeah, looking forward to hearing everybody's questions as well.
Oh, thank you so much. It's wow, it's amazing how diverse all your backgrounds are. And I think Rahayu gave a really a wide idea of how wide, she gave you an idea of how wide and important cybersecurity is as well today. So anyway, we'll just start today's session with the one question that most people seem to ask. Okay, if one has no experience in cybersecurity, how does one even start? Where do you even begin to gain the experience and knowledge to join this field? So maybe Sandra can start again. Okay, for maybe since you're a hiring manager, you can focus more on what skills are expected, and what do employers want to see on a CV.
Right. Okay. First and foremost, if you are looking to switch from a different career and then moving into cybersecurity, you really need to find which field are you planning to specialize yourself in first, and which one are you passionate on to move your career path towards to, right? So it's not just merely like, okay, I'm waking up a day and I'm gonna change my job, but you need to know, you need to plan accordingly. So there's always a saying, no preparation, no celebration. So if you want to really prepare yourself, you want to ensure that you know where you are targeting, what sort of area you want to specialize, as cybersecurity is really wide space. So first and foremost, identify that first. Secondly, if you do not have much of trainings or courses that you've done to upscale yourself, probably you want to look into that sort of path in just getting a little bit of upscaling by going into courses online on introduction for cybersecurity for beginners. There's a lot of websites and courses are available out there for free. So you can get in touch with me later if you are keen to know more on that. Yeah. So what would hiring managers would like to see is where you are from and what you're going to, and how can you integrate and incorporate all these experiences towards to changing your career path. Probably Rahayu and Nigel can add on to from where I started.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you really need to do your research. Maybe Nigel or Rahayu can explain a bit more of how you can start doing that kind of research.
Yep. So, I mean, what Sandra mentioned is pretty important, right? You can't just make the switch overnight. There is I wouldn't say there's a lot of learning curve over there, but you do have to take that initiative and you have to be passionate about certain areas. And once you identify a particular area that you want to specialize in, then you can start working towards it. As an example, when I started my career, I did know I want to move towards network security to begin with. My first step was I started working and getting a broader understanding of technology as a whole. So I didn't limit myself to just networks at that point. I just started looking at applications. I learned programming. I got myself familiar with networking concepts, support, basically all kinds of technologies that I could get familiar with. And then I started building myself towards network and specializing in that area, and then focusing on roles on that area. I started grooming myself with certifications initially. So yes, certain certification would help you to, validate the knowledge and everything that you have in place, or you've learned through all this training that you've been taking. So I would say that this is one of the ways you can go. But to start off somewhere, you need to start getting familiar with technology to begin with, and then focus on an area you want to specialize in, then work towards it. Once you are specialized in this area and you want to move to a different area, it becomes easier to move from one area to another area. In terms of trainings, there's a lot of things. So I'm someone who believes that you can do a lot of learning yourself. So self-learnings. I don't focus too much on certifications, I would say, because if you do a lot of things hands-on, you learn better, in my opinion. Though, because a certification is just merely about you've read a book, you've understood it, and you pass an exam. There are certain certifications which are slightly different, though, that are hands-on also. So I usually look, and again, as a hiring manager, sometimes what I do look for is the passion. Whether someone is passionate about security, whether they have some kind of diversity, because if you're just looking to focus on one area in security, it might become difficult because organizations do have changing needs. So sometimes you might have an area which is, say, focused on networks, but tomorrow you want to move into something slightly different. And if you have a candidate who's slightly diverse and can adapt, it makes having those kind of candidates good to be on board.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I can expand a little more on that as well. So I definitely technical skills is important, right? But also the other thing to also look at with cybersecurity is that it actually runs the gamut of many different aspects of it, right? So there is we have a cyber defense team that is heavily technical. They need to understand the technology that they're looking at, how to diagnose threats, how to respond to threats. These things they do require technical background, but there are also risk management teams, right? So a lot of cybersecurity is about managing risk, and understanding that begins with a lot of reading, right? So you may not have a really deep technical background. I don't. I'm very much a system implementer versus somebody who builds systems from scratch. But having even the most basic background, I think, helps. But there is so much information out there that you are actually spoiled for choice in terms of where you can get. And sometimes it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose where all the information just comes at you. So I think one of the important things is to just start, right? And because cybersecurity is such a major topic nowadays, there's so many things that are available online. For example, if you start looking at standards, right, just to get an idea of what it is that when people talk about managing cybersecurity, what does that actually mean in a business context, right? One of the most thrown about terms I think that you'll hear is using standards from Nist, right? Nist is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Yes, that's what that is. And a lot of organizations use that as a basis because it covers what is expected to be handled by an organization that wants to be secure, right? So you just type in cybersecurity standards and you'll get a whole bunch of things, right? To get a basic understanding of what it is that's required when you want to implement cybersecurity in any organization. And starting from there, then you'll get a better idea of how to zoom into the areas that you think would be relevant to you. We also have change management teams that really do not have technical knowledge, but rely on the technical teams to help them craft the psychology behind how they do change programs to be able to guide people towards how to become cybersecure in their operations and their practices, right? So I definitely think you can never be at a loss if you have technical skills. I think that will definitely serve you well in cybersecurity. But if you don't have it, there are other parts of cybersecurity that you can use as an entry point. And we are definitely, I think, one of the things that we definitely look for when looking at a candidate is problem-solving skills and being able to critically think through a process quickly. Like that's really key, right? The one thing about cybersecurity, and we'll talk about this when we talk about like a day in the life of, things move really fast. Like it's not, you don't sit around going like, so the next standard that, like that doesn't happen, right? Like, you just have to know these things off the top of your head. So really somebody who can think on their feet is able to very quickly respond is really important. So on top of technical skills, the basic knowledge around standards is also critical thinking, problem solving. For me personally, the interviews that I've conducted heavily rely on use cases. So we ask you to be able to walk through a specific situation, what your thinking would be around that. So really being able to bring experience to the table, really important. If you don't have the experience, bring the thinking to the table, right? So that's really important for us to be able to see that you can demonstrate the skill sets that you say you have.
Wow, so that looks like a lot of work for people who are just starting out. But I'm just wondering, is there any specific, I mean, you mentioned that certificates are, I mean, certificates are not very important in the long run, but are there any like basic certificates that you definitely need to get if the employer knows nothing else about you?
Well, I would not say that there is any basic certification. Yes, there are certifications. Like if you do the Security Plus, for instance, it gives you a basic understanding of security and general concepts, and it covers a lot of ground for security. And it's a basic level, right? But then again, it depends on what area you want to specialize. For example, if you are looking towards, say, networks, right, then doing a Security Plus might not benefit you. Then you might want to focus on a track that focuses more towards networking and then build on top of that. So once you have the networking foundation, you can build on top of that as, say, network security. Likewise, if you want to move into cloud, for instance, you can do a cloud certification at a basic level. I know AWS has some essential certification, basic level. And from there, if you want, you can slowly move into some kind of specialization. So to answer your question, if you do not have the experience, you can try to demonstrate it in different ways, not just certifications. For example, you can build your projects, right? You can build some homegrown projects. You can do some freelance work. It doesn't necessarily have to be a paid job, but you can demonstrate something that you've done and put that on your CV. So to me, I think this kind of also helps. So you don't have the work experience, but if you say that, okay, I have done some kind of freelance work, and I have worked with certain clients, or it could even be pro bono work, right? But I've done something, and this kind of work is translated into the real world. It's taken into production, I would say, but you can translate this over there. So yeah, these are certain things you can do, not just certifications. So as long as you can demonstrate that you have an understanding of it, it helps. Certifications do help sometimes. So when you're a beginner, right, at least having a certification, it kind of validates that you do have that knowledge. You have passed that exam. But in my honest opinion, and based on my experience, once you move into the real world environment, you move into production environment, it's very different from what you've actually done in a lab or in a certification. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so let's say you've already done the readings, done your research, you've done your portfolio, and now you're going to send your applications to the companies. So my next question would be, are there any entry-level positions that fresh graduates or someone making a career switch should apply to, like is the most suitable for them? So yeah, I guess Nigel, you can answer.
Okay, so in my opinion, I think I would say that there is one particular area. I can give you 3 examples for now, just on the top of my head, right? So let's say if you start off with technology consulting, something that Rahayu mentioned also. That is one area. Another area would be, say, tech support. And you can do a lot of maybe some kind of security analysis and or be a security analyst. And my reasoning behind these are, so let's say if you get into technology consulting, right? It does help you, if it's a customer facing role, for instance, it does help you with the soft skills, people skills, things like that. You would be working with multiple customers, and the exposure that you get, working with different customers, different environments, different problems, and the problem solving that you have to come up with, right? So you have to come up with solutions. So your thinking changes, the way you interact with people changes. And all this does help at the next level. So if you want to start off, maybe this is one good area. Another thing I said is tech support. The reason why I say tech support is because it depends on which area of whether you have that kind of exposure or not. But you do get exposure, say, hardware, software, networks, databases. You will be supporting different applications. At some point, but you can take them individually, and then later on, you can kind of piece them together to understand the broader solution. Then you know how things work. Another area could be, like I said, security analysis or being a security analyst, right? This is more focused on security. So you can have some kind of a role where you're working in a SOC, where you're looking at security threats, looking at intelligence. You're digging deep into security. So yeah, these are some of the things you can possibly start off with.
Nice. Rahayu, since you're the one who made the career switch from a totally different field to what you're doing, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I totally agree that there is, depending on what it is that you studied, right? There may be some areas that you will fit in naturally. I also do think that it's a constant learning, right? And even if you come from a technical background, I think that what you'll find very quickly is that the perspective that you take when doing cybersecurity is different than when you are deploying a system or if you're building a system, right? So the perspective that you're coming from is how to secure that system, which is slightly different than building it, right? We always want to move towards being secure by design, but that's something you learn along the way. Nowadays, what I've noticed is that when you're learning how to develop applications, that becomes sort of like a natural next step that you learn. But a lot of people who may have already been in technology for like a decade or so and they switch over will find that the approach that they take to technology has to change slightly, right? So you're no longer just talking about supporting or deploying the technology, you're talking about protecting it, which means that you're working with a risk-based approach. You're trying to understand how to prioritize things, right? So is it more important for you to make sure that your firewalls are patched versus making sure that your identity management system is up to date, right? So there are things that you have to approach that are slightly different. So I think it depends heavily what it is that you study or what your background is, and how you move into a space is heavily dependent on what you also want to learn in the future. For me, I asked for the strategy role specifically because I wanted to know. So first of all, I wanted that big picture, right? To really be able to understand how to put the pieces together based on what I understood of the current business and taking that, translating that with the support from technical team members and people who really understand the technology behind it. So I think a lot of it is also making use of the team members around you as well to be able to learn very quickly, learn constantly, and also to be able to stay abreast of the new developments that come up from a cybersecurity perspective. Things are always changing on a daily basis, and there's always new threats that are coming up, new vulnerabilities, things that you've had to patch like last week. So I feel like it's just that as long as you're willing to learn, I feel that entry level position can really take you forward into different parts of the organization. The other thing I want to add before I forget, internships are a great way for you to get an understanding of what it's like to be in cybersecurity. We've actually had a couple of data science majors join us because we wanted to have the capability to dissect data in a much more dynamic way. And these team members came in with no cybersecurity understanding, right? But it was just about how do we look at this data and interpret it. And along the way, they picked up those skills. So I think the idea of being able to get people who are not yet graduates yet to be able to come in and really understand that. Somebody mentioned CTFs as well. Like all these learning opportunities that are out there are a great way for you to create an entry level position for yourself. You know what I mean? So just to get the kind of skill sets that are kind of base requirements. So wherever it is that you end up joining in the organization, you kind of have a base understanding of how the whole system operates overall.
Nice. So it basically sounds as though you need to figure out what you're interested in and then look it up. All right. Thank you so much for that, Nigel and Rahayu. I guess my next question is, what kind of companies in Malaysia would be a great for a first cybersecurity job? So this, I think Sandra, you could comment a bit on this.
Yeah. So thanks to all this COVID-19 situation we are having right now, I think cybersecurity is the one is in demand, and we are benefiting a lot from what's happening currently. But in terms of the industry, I'll just cover it as an industry per se. All the ones that is really high in demand at the moment for cybersecurity is financial institutions, financial services industry, fintech, and consulting firms. Going into Big Fours, that would be a great start as well, as you will be able to leverage on a lot of the clients' technologies, platforms, and tools, which is a good start for you to learn a lot in the beginning. And also shared services functions, whereby you will be serving in a bigger and wider organization. And like what Rahayu added on earlier in terms of internship, I think internship is one of the best ways for you to start in the beginning and to sort of like identify where you will actually prosper or master yourself and work towards it. So look for organizations that's going to give you a lot of interesting opportunity to master a lot of skills, to master a lot of technologies or tools that can assist you along the way. That would be a great start at the moment. And of course, not forgetting oil and gas. It's definitely still a huge market. Since Rahayu is from there, I'm just going to add on to that. But yeah, it's still a huge market, and I'm sure learning is a never-ending process. So wherever you start, you will definitely have a lot of things to learn and go from there.
I'm just wondering, since you said look for companies that offer opportunities, do you think it's better to look for startups or bigger organizations?
I think it depends on where you want to go for. So probably, there's an advantage there's always pros and cons, wherever you go. So it's more on you identifying exactly which organization or which sort of platform will give you a better exposure in terms of what you want to do. So like, a lot of specialization that was mentioned by Nigel earlier, like SOC, threat hunting, cybersecurity analysts. So if you know that you have certain companies that's going to provide you that opportunity, then go for it. The best is always to do your research, talk to people, get more information from those who are currently in the market, who's currently working in certain companies. So LinkedIn is really a good platform for you to connect and get more information. So there's nothing wrong in asking and learning. Just don't keep stalking people. Yeah.
Okay, one more question for the getting yourself ready for a role in cybersecurity. Can you recommend one resource that you think everyone should definitely, besides doing the research, can you recommend one online resource or free training that you've seen that you think most people should try and do?
I can take up this one, just one that I know, probably Nigel and Rahayu can add on. There's this website called Cybersecurity. It's like library, but Cybersecurity. They provide a lot of online and free training courses for beginners. And also there's another one where you can test yourself for hacking. Try Hack Me and Hack the Box. So these are like a few platforms that you can check out as well.
Yeah, to add to this, for myself, again, my personal learning, the way I learn is I'm more of a visual learner. I don't read a lot of books. So I spend a lot of time on YouTube. So there are a lot of resources on YouTube, for instance. There's another site, it's called edX. They provide university courses for free. So if you can pick up, MIT courses, you can pick up courses from top universities, right? But it's all for free. So edX, Coursera, sometimes Udemy has free courses. So these are just some of them that I picked on. Something that Sandra also mentioned, right? So you have a lot of CTFs or war games and things like this that you can utilize. It's a lot of learning. So it's all free. You just have to sign up. You have access to all these boxes basically, or these devices or systems. You just play around, learn from there. So it's about just taking the initiative, I think. So these are different resources and depending on your interest, you can just pick any of them.
And I would also spend some time looking at what's happening globally, and good resources for that are the World Economic Forum. As I was going to say, the US Department of Energy, and that's specifically because I'm in oil and gas, but because in the United States in particular, they have a specific focus on critical infrastructure, so things like the energy sector. But they dedicate a significant amount of effort and time to actually create strategies that are overarching around like holistic cybersecurity, right? So not just about specific technologies and whatnot, but how to protect an entire organization. And they refer to current events, right? So I think that that's really important to sort of connect the dots. And I'm a huge podcast listener, so I've got like a whole list of cybersecurity podcasts that I find quite useful in the morning. I don't always pay attention, but it's always like sometimes you hear this like keyword and you're like, oh, what is that? And then Google's your best friend and you just start going into a rabbit hole learning about these things. But I think it's really important that on top of the formal learning that you do, whether it's a certification or a course, that you also apply that to real world situations, right? And the best way to do that is just to open up and read about the news. Especially when you're going into an interview, you will get asked that. Like in particular for us, there's been a lot of things that have been happening in oil and gas. Like we ask about that. Like, what is your perspective on this specific event? How do you think it could have been prevented? Which is a loaded question, but obviously the things we're testing you for. But I think the idea is just to be able to demonstrate that those things that you're learning, the training, the certifications are demonstrable against real world situations. Always the key to being able to prove the fact that you understand what it is that you're getting into.
Thank you. So I'm hearing there are so many things like we have videos to watch, there are free online courses, and there are books you can read. And also please keep up to date on current issues. Okay, so Rahayat just mentioned about questions that interviewers will ask, and that's actually the next part. So once you've sent in your resume, you've identified the company you want to work for that you can grow, that has opportunities for you to grow in, and you finally get a call. So can we hear a bit about what the interview process, what a typical interview process would look like? Sandra, would you like to start?
Okay. So typically, a lot of interviews are quite similar in all these processes. So probably you might want to be very aware in terms of what's the timeline like, what's the turnaround time like in the beginning itself, so you're not disappointed. First of all, the processes can take around 2 to 3 levels of interviews or more, depending on your levels and the company's processes and procedures as well. And like what we have actually covered a little bit earlier on, interviews usually will look at how you can answer certain scenarios. You might not be a hands-on person. You might not be able to do a lot of things hands-on as you are beginning or you're switching, but your ability to show your soft skill, how you can articulate certain answers, thinking on the feet. These are the sort of things that you want to prepare yourself with. This is where your reading, your research, and some of the courses or trainings will kind of guide you and help you to answer. But most of the times you have to really understand what the role is about, how the company is, and what are you going to contribute towards for that role and for the particular company and the role. So these are the areas that you want to cover. And I would say interview expectations are usually, technical skills is always one of the things they look for. But apart from that, your soft skill, your passion, the way that you can think on feet and answer your questions in a very proper manner and articulated and composed. I mean, this is where things will give you an upper hand in terms of being successful in the interview.
Thank you. Nigel, maybe you can give a more, because you mentioned that you do hire as well. Can you give more an explanation about your process, if or more specific example?
Sure. First of all, what Sandra did mention is pretty much in line with what a lot of companies would do. And as a candidate, you do have to prepare on all those grounds. As a hiring manager, there are certain things that I do look at, or I would definitely want to have in my candidates, right? And Rahayu also touched on this. So definitely you would want to look at problem solving, because when it comes to security, you need to be able to solve problems. And not just security, in any company, when you go, you're getting there to solve a problem, right? So you need to be good at problem solving. The way you think in security is very important, because let's face it, you need to know in a way, like, how a hacker thinks, so that you can sort of take a step, to cover those gaps in between, right? So if you can think on differently, you need to be able to think out of the box. You need to be able to be creative when it comes to thinking. During my interviews, I definitely throw one or two scenarios. Like, it's not so much about it's not really about a right or wrong answer. It's about how you think and how you solve that situation or the problem. So yes, I'm guessing there would definitely be a lot of the other people out there, who would be looking at similar candidates, or looking for similar things in candidates.
Okay. Can you elaborate a bit on what exactly gets tested? So you say you give them a scenario, and is it like an oral, or do you give them like a computer test?
So no, it's mostly oral. So I just give them a scenario. If you have to build a system, right? Just as an example, let's say you need to build a system, a full website and a database and something like, how do you build the whole thing? Just tell me about it. And now that you've built it, how do you secure it? Because now that I know, okay, fine, I have an application, I have a database, I know that these two components need to communicate. So that means there's networking in between. So now I need to look at application security, I need to look at database security, then I need to look at network security. So you take different components, put them all, first ask them to build a big situation there, then ask them questions specifically to that, narrowing it down. So I usually walk through that solution that they built and try to find gaps in that solution and ask them about how you secure that. So that is the way I do it.
Nice. Okay. Do you have anything to add, Rahayu?
I was going to say, like, on top of the use cases, we do read your resume. So I think in particular with cybersecurity, because I know a lot of people will say, yeah, HR never reads a resume. Like, we read the resume, partially because the roles that we hire for are pretty specific. So we do say you can move, right? But we hire for a specific role. So there's a specific set of skill sets that we're looking for. And we will ask you questions about your experience, right? And if you have no experience, we'll test you on the use cases, and we'll also probe a little bit more based on the things that you learned in school. Like, say, for example, if it was you were learning about data science, how you apply those skills, right? So we do read your resume, we will ask you questions about it. So as in other scenario, don't make stuff up, because we will test you on that information. That's one. The other thing also, if you are applying for a middle management or more senior position, leadership skills are a must. We will ask you questions around how you manage teams. Now, whether you do that in practice, we won't be able to tell, but I think the way that you demonstrate how you manage, how you explain to me, you manage team members who are difficult, who in a high stakes situation, how they would be handled, and how you would handle small teams versus large teams in specific situations are all questions that we ask. Not unusual. If you've ever been in any corporate interview, they will ask that kind of question. But I think the crux of it is that is a determining factor for us when it comes to hiring for those positions. Like I said, like in cybersecurity, like, we do not waste time, right? So I think the idea is that if you can't efficiently manage a team, that becomes something that is a determining factor for us in hiring as well.
All right, thank you. Just wondering, so you do read the resume. Is there any technical tests, especially for specific roles? Do you have that as well?
I'll take this. So in my company, and I usually don't take any technical tests, but I do know companies that do take technical tests. For example, let's say you are applying as a pen tester, you might be given a system to break into. So there is a vulnerable system out there. They will ask you to break into it. They will ask you to write a report on top of that. So yes, there are companies that do ask you to do it, but this is specific to the role that you're applying for. So it really depends. There were some companies where I had applied in the past where you did have to write an essay. Maybe language was something that they were looking at, but you know what I mean? So it really depends on the role that you're applying, and it also depends on the company.
Thank you so much for enlightening us, Nigel. Okay, and so we're moving on to the final part. What happens after you get the job? So we would like to know what a typical work day looks like in a cybersecurity role. So maybe Rahayu, you would like to explain?
It could take up like the rest of the hour explaining this, but again, always depends on what your role is. So our cyber defense team, we have an operations center that is just all they do 24/7 is look at telemetry and data and look at our landscape, right? So they're forever, all they do is protect our systems and make sure that we are secure. I know that sounds simple, but there's a lot of work that goes behind that, right? So for them, because we operate 24/7, as most support teams do, the idea is that they are analyzing data, looking at reports, when something needs to get escalated, that there's an entire process behind that, right? So their lives are different from mine. Because I work in strategy, I think for the most part, most people's days are not the same. And I can say that for us in particular, because especially in light of many things that are happening right now globally, right? We are forever needing to update the business, update information. And so my day could start off with having to present to a leadership team to explain to them, this is what we're going to do in response to something that happened yesterday, right? So for example, if anybody's really curious, just go ahead and Google Colonial Pipeline, and you'll get this whole report about ransomware that happened, an attack that happened last week. And we had to, be ready to talk about that at work, right? So that was something that we off the cuff had to do. We have team meetings at least once a week. Each of the individual teams within my team will have their own meetings to catch up on, to update each other on things that are currently happening, as well as take actions for the next week, right? So we move very quickly. And we always, at the end of the day, sort of in an ideal situation, take a step back, look at what needs to get done the next day. But primarily, a lot of our work is not, depending on what's currently happening, is not necessarily 9 to 5, right? So not to say that we're forever working 14-hour days. That's not it. We have things change very quickly. And so we are responsive to make sure that the business is secure. But we are also looking forward, right? So all the things that I was talking about, staying educated, making sure that we're ahead of that, get an understanding of our own threat landscape so that we're a couple of steps ahead where we can be. All of that takes work. So on a daily basis, we're constantly learning, we're constantly pushing out information, we're constantly updating the business. I saw a question about whether there was work-life balance. There is, but you have to be ready for situations where sometimes it's going to be just a long day and a long weekend. And the fact of the matter is, with security, there's no 9 to 5, right? And so depending again on your role, you may be called upon to support or exercise certain actions to be able to protect the organization. And some days you're just doing presentation slides. So it really varies. It really varies on what's currently happening. And I think the thing about being in cybersecurity that it's no 2 days are alike, and it's exciting in that way. But you do have to learn how to draw certain boundaries and be able to say and rely on your teammates. It's a huge thing. It's very hard, I think, to operate effectively if you're not able to collaborate cleanly across the team.
Oh, thank you so much. I guess, Nigel, you can describe how differently your day goes from Rahayu's.
Well, it's pretty much what you said. It really depends on the role. So I've been in situations where I've been working for 10, 12, 14 hours a day. I've been in jobs that require rotating shifts and things like this. So I've seen that side of things. My current role does not require it. But yes, different roles will have different requirements. Ideally, it really depends. So we have team meetings on a daily basis. Then we catch up on things that need to be done for the day, things that we've done previous day. We plan, so there's a lot of planning that's for the forthcoming projects that are coming across. A lot of interaction and collaboration with teams when there's a need. Stakeholder discussions, so a lot of meetings on that front. So there isn't really a single day which is almost the same. So it really depends on what we're doing. And again, your day would really depend on the role. So I have a bunch of engineers who some of my team members who would have a very different day compared to me, right? So they would be doing a lot of hands-on work, a lot of technical work, whereas mine might not be that way. And yeah.
Wow. So how do you maintain your work-life balance? Since it's such a reactionary role, right? You have to be prepared for anything.
Yes. So, well, it's a little tricky because if it's a 9 to 5, you know that after 5 you don't have to worry about anything. But there are certain roles, and like how you said, even though if you're not doing a 9 to 5, you still have to be on your toes sometimes, because when there's a need, if there's something that goes wrong, you need to be available. So I think it's a little tricky because you just need to keep a phone on all the time. So, and just hoping that your phone doesn't ring, because if it does ring, that means something has gone wrong. So yes, there have been situations where you're not really expecting anything, but your phone starts ringing, and then something's wrong, and then you have to rush in. So yes, so it's a little tricky to drive that balance between work life, but you need to know where your boundaries are, and there is if you need to know where you can draw those lines, I guess.
So both you and Rahayu mentioned something about there are many different roles in the cybersecurity team. Could you elaborate a bit on the different roles?
When it comes to different roles, I mean, there are a ton of them, right? So you have primary roles that are more technical and non-technical. So I've seen some of them mentioned in the chat also, a couple of roles. So if you think about it, you have, say, applications, right? If you're working with applications, then you have application security. If you're working with blockchain, then you have blockchain security. You have IoT, then IoT security. So you have those like in technical, then you have pen testing, you have threat intel, you can get into risk management, which is more on managing risk, mobile security, architecture. Many of them are looking for projects, right? Project managers then. So you need certain people who kind of can interface between the business and technical side of things. So facilitate both sides of it. So project managers are good for that. Auditing. So auditing doesn't necessarily have to be security or technical in nature. You need to understand processes. You need to understand certain frameworks and things like this. So audit is another area. Consulting. Again, consulting is quite wide. So you might cover different areas, or you might be very specific or a very niche area or specialized area. Critical infrastructure, right? That could be another area. Then you have compliance, you have incident response. Pen testing, as I mentioned, then you have red team, blue team, purple teaming. These are new things that are coming up. Again, strategy, governance, so many areas that you can specialize in and move into.
Thank you. Well, so is it safe to say that the roles are the same as similar to possible career paths for people who are interested in cybersecurity as well?
So yes, all these roles are available to anyone who's interested, right? So these are very specialized areas, I would say. So one area is very different from the other. So depending on which area you want to focus, you can start planning and preparing yourself to get into that area. So there are certain areas that you can transition from, from one area to the other. For example, let's say you're a developer, right? You're writing code. So the next step you could do is maybe you can look at, say, application security, because that might be how you write secure code to begin with. If you're writing secure code, then you can possibly look at secure testing or security testing, which would be part of it. From there, you can branch out to maybe pen testing, because now that you know how application works, you can test applications, or maybe you can take it a notch further. So what I'm trying to say is that, okay, you can start off with one place and slowly move in that direction. So it really depends which area you want to specialize, I guess.
All right. Sandra, could you elaborate, because you mentioned that you hire for mid and higher, right? Are there any other career paths we have not mentioned yet?
I think it's pretty much covered as well. It's actually a very wide space. So like how one of the participants here mentioned, there is technical and non-technical. Again, where you're going to head to is what you want to look for. So if you want to just, probably I can just add on to what the person have already introduced there. I think Muhammad Maruf, I think he gave us quite a good description on the list of roles that we can go for. But there's also on top of that, IT security, data leak protection, DLP, identity access management, cloud security. These are all few other roles that have not been, that I would say that the market for them are high, but we do have less talents in the market. So it's best for you to look into this sort of new opportunities as well. Not forgetting on the non-technical ones, tech risk, information security and governance. These are all upcoming and always in demand for a lot of industries in the market right now. So these are the type of roles that you can look for. And if you are planning to make a switch, then probably you can have a look at the sort of non-technical ones as well on a different stage. But again, when it comes to non-technical problem solving, ability to handle stakeholders, stakeholder management, I mean, those are the things that you will be tested upon, and to you need to manage yourself and your ability in that area as well.
I would also like to add, so the variety of roles is definitely, I think that you can, given your background, probably think to like how you would retrofit into a role, right? But I think one of the things that I do have to caution, and I mentioned this in every interview, most organizations right now are working towards like a holistic cybersecurity stance, right? So their posture is not, they're not 100%, like they wouldn't need cybersecurity in the first place if you were secure, right? But what that also implies is that the organization is also trying to find its way, right? And this is true for, actually, if you just read up on a cyber attack, you'll find that the organization was not ready to face that attack, right? Which means that they're also still trying to grow as an organization from a cybersecurity perspective. So you will most likely, unless you're joining a technical company that specializes in that and you're providing that service, but if you're joining an organization where they are trying to set up or are the cybersecurity outfit is part of the organization itself, it's a learning curve, right? Because you're trying to get the business to move forward in a way that's secure, which might change the way that they work. And that also means that you have to teach the business how to do that quickly, and you also have to learn how to do that quickly as well, right? Because hackers wait for no woman or man. So it's like they're always going to try to attack you. They're always going to be a couple of steps ahead. So when you are joining an organization where that team is supporting the organization, it will be very exciting. Let's just put it that way. So there is, it's a constant learning journey for everybody that's involved. And I think one of the things that you have to be ready for is you got to be curious, you got to want to learn more. And it is, having a lot of energy certainly helps.
Okay, now I'm wondering where you get all your energy from, Rahayu. Okay, so one more question. Can you think of any common myths there are about careers in cybersecurity? Yep, maybe Nigel, you can lead.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I think for a lot of people, sometimes I think one of the myths is that security is all about pen testing, or it's all about testing, just breaking into the system or something like that. So people think that you get into security, it's kind of that one area, whereas you have a lot of variety when it comes to security, as some of them mentioned, right? So you have the technical side of things, you have the non-tech side of things. It really depends. But I think from as a normal layperson, you always tend to think, okay, it's about breaking into the system, and that's about it, which is mostly pen testing, I guess. So it's not true.
Okay, it's not just about testing and pen testing and trying to hack. What about the rest of you?
I would also say I think people don't expect it to be so heavily process oriented. And the thing about being able to apply cybersecurity anywhere is the fact that it has to be applied against a specific set of standards or a specific process for you to be able to say, oh, we are safe, right? So I think when an organization starts to set these things up, you need an entire governance in place, right? To be able to say, this is how we're measuring whether we're safe or not. And that requires a lot of setting up of frameworks, being able to refer to standards, lots and lots of reading. And that's sort of the backbone of cybersecurity, right? So it's not as glamorous as all those, white hat, black hat hackers. Like those exist, they're there, but that's only part of what we do. Exactly like what Nigel was saying, like pen testing is just part of it. There's a whole aspect of having to build a backbone to be able to support all the things that you do within cybersecurity. And that is the piece I think people don't see. So for you to be able to effectively secure an organization, you got to set all those things up. They have to be in place. They have to be measurable for you to be able to say, how much risk that you're accepting versus the things that you're willing to put on the line. And part of what we do in cybersecurity is educating the business to do that, right? So to be able to understand that it's not just about making sure that all the locks are in place, but being able to figure out how big of a lock do you need? Like how long do you leave it locked for? Do you need a lock? Like all of those questions need to be asked first. So I think people don't realize that there is an entire segment of cybersecurity that requires that, and they just think it's about hacking. It's not true.
All right, thank you so much. So it sounds like a lot. Okay, it's now 9, so we're going to go into Q&A session time. Do you all need a break? Does everyone need a break? Because then we can just pause for 5 minutes and then come back. So can you let me in the chat? Or the panelists, do you feel you're okay to continue?
I'm fine.
All right. Okay, so now during the Q&A session, if you have a question, you can turn on your mic to ask the question, or you can, yeah. So we're opening the floor now.
Yes, we've
sorry.
also got a list of previous questions.
Oh yeah, okay. All right, I'll look at that.
I've also compiled the questions from the chat too.
Okay. All right, so here's a few. Okay, how will blockchains disrupt cybersecurity technology?
Well, I'm not really a blockchain expert or anything of that sort, but I don't really think blockchain is going to disrupt cybersecurity. It does. Blockchain, it kind of leverages on certain aspects of security, certain areas of security, like the hashing, the encryption, things like this. But at the end of the day, is it going to completely disrupt security? I don't think so. I could be wrong here, but in my opinion, I don't think so.
Okay.
And I would add on to that, I mean, blockchain is basically another type of technology, right? And I think what you'll find the deeper you go into cybersecurity is that it always comes back to controls and standards and how you are defending or protecting that technology, right? So I think blockchain is definitely a big thing, but so is IoT. So is extended networking. There's all these other technologies that are coming out that are affecting our way of life. And they are starting to be things that we have to look at more deeply in terms of how we're going to safeguard them and protect against threats that threaten them. So I would say, agree with Nigel, not disrupting per se, but it is definitely something that we have to start planning for in terms of how we're going to protect for that. Because it's not, a lot of these technologies are, it's the same way that if you look at finance, how that changes things, right? And it doesn't necessarily change. People are still exchanging money. They're still buying things, right? Those transactions don't change, but how they do it is changing. So you got to build sort of the mechanisms around the how to protect that, how to secure it, and how to defend against the people who use it to be threats, right? So there's that aspect as well, which is sort of a really interesting part about strategy and having to think 10 steps ahead in cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you. Here's an interesting question. How do you move traditional IT practitioners to be on board the cybersecurity requirements of current times and partner effectively to cybersecure the organization, especially if management, including IT head, is not cyber aware? So I think, Rahul, you mentioned a bit of this problem as well, about organizations still learning what to do.
Yeah, and I think it's partially because you have to move faster than you have capability for, I think is a lot of the problem as well. Because a lot of things that the threats tend to happen yesterday, and now you're trying to fix a system that's already broken. And also I think it's because a lot of people see it as an imposition because it changes the way that you work, right? So that's why I mentioned earlier that change management and like a long-term strategy is really important, right? So making sure that you're identifying the stakeholders at the beginning of that journey, right? When at the beginning, let's say we take the beginning of a calendar year, and you're looking at the things that need to get done, the threat landscape that you've put together to say, okay, this is where we should be looking in terms of protecting the organization and involving your IT stakeholders, your business stakeholders from the get-go. If you treat cybersecurity as an afterthought and just tell them these things later, they're going to treat it as an afterthought as well. So you got to put that effort to bring them on board and make it part of business strategy, right? So it's no longer just a tech thing. It's about how you operate as a business. So I think, especially in scenarios where people are not cyber aware, they actually are. They just don't want to do anything about it, right? And so because it is additional work initially. It's like there's an uphill climb that you're going to get onto, but once you're there, it makes it so much easier to operate moving forward, right? So the trick is how do you bring them up that hill to get to a point where they're ready to take the rest of the ride with you. So like we spend a lot of time in change management, we educating staff. There's always training, not just for our teams, but also for system owners, for people who manage risk, IT practitioners, operating technology practitioners. So really understanding who is important in your business, or who is in your business, right? Everybody's important, but what role do they play is really significant in trying to bridge that gap. So it's not, again, that's not just about the technology, it's really understanding the psychology of what makes the business run, what it is that you're trying to protect, and how you bring those two things together and bring the business along with you to get to that point. I say all those words, it's really hard. Let's put it out there.
All right, thank you. Okay.
Just to add on to that, I think it's also the awareness for those traditional IT practitioners, being aware that, how important it is and how it is, really important to secure the organization, regardless. A simple email, all this tiny bit in the organization is important for them to secure. And a lot of them are still trying to divert themselves from that. Also, I believe in terms of management, there's also some cost involvement where some of them are not willing to invest, not looking into investing certain amount of time and cost into this to practice it in an organization fully. So I think those are few issues that need to be addressed, but mostly there are a lot of organizations who are also hiring cybersecurity advisor, whereby they come in to influence, to sort of like give more understanding and awareness to a lot of business units, the heads, the stakeholders, to be aware and to understand how important it is to secure certain things, and then talking on the procedures, on the standards, how important it is to cover those areas as well. So that's also another opportunity when it comes to moving traditional IT practitioners on board on cybersecurity. You get advisors to come in to support you guys in an organization.
So following up to that question, how do you quantify the benefits to push for a dedicated cybersecurity team within an organization that doesn't have it as an existing practice? Because obviously it's quite important, but how do you make the push? Any thoughts on that?
I would kind of say that similar thing to what Raha you mentioned earlier, right? It's all about the business. And when it comes to business, there's always some kind of risk. And if you can highlight these things and manage, it's all about the management understanding this. So if they do understand what the risks are to their business, that's where you would probably look at having a team on board and building and having a dedicated team, I think. So I think that's how it would start. You need to understand that, okay, you have a business have risk, and we want to manage those risks effectively and properly, because ultimately we want to reduce those risks. And that's where that's how it would ideally start. So I think when it comes to quantifying the benefits, you would have to quantify it based on the risk that you have, that you see. So if there's a certain level of risk that you see, then you would have to kind of quantify that these are the damages that would have. If you can put it in monetary terms, or maybe in legal aspects also, right? So sometimes in some countries, you have legal requirements and certain mandates because of which you need to have security in place. And these are things that would help to have a dedicated team, I guess.
Okay.
And somebody actually mentioned industry competition and regulatory requirements. Oh yeah, that's like, it's like, oh, we should have done this yesterday. I'm like, really? Those are always really good triggers. I think real life situations in general, right? So it's unfortunate, but cyber attacks are happening on a daily basis. You just have to Google for it, bring it up, say this company lost X amount. Colonial Pipeline was out of business for 6 days, guys. That's a whole entire freaking week, right? That they lost because of ransomware. And it's no joke in terms of like the actual loss, the monetary loss that organizations will be hit by, as well as the reputational aspect, right? Because yeah, okay, data breaches happen all the time, but it's people's information, right? And when that happens to an organization, there's an entire PR segment that gets triggered because it's a mess to your reputation. So I think bringing those things up as a reality, it's not things that happen in movies. It's a day-to-day headline that you see. A lot of, like, for example, the World Economic Forum puts that as one of the top 3 or top 5 things I think that organizations have to be worried about in the next 5 to 10 years. So those are definite things that you can put on the table and say it's already happening. We're a couple of steps behind, right? But the other thing also that you can emphasize, which I think is actually really important, you don't have to implement all of these things, right? When we say all of these things in terms of, have a defensive capability immediately, have, a team of 100 people. it's a process, it's a journey. And I think it's really important to emphasize that you have to start somewhere versus not starting at all, right? So I think in terms of being able to say, okay, this is the amount of investment that we need, let's start with this. And going back to what Nigel was saying, that if you can say, this is the risk that we're currently facing that we have to manage, let's focus on this area first, helps sort of ring fence what it is that you need to focus on. And then from there, grow if you really need to have that practice in-house. Some organizations outsource it, and that's maybe the path that they want to go. But I think the important thing is to take that first step to look at what it is that you need to protect, quantify that, and then start small. You don't have to, go all out and have like a full-on security team on site. So, yeah.
So you really need to know what's important to the business to convince them of the benefit of having a cybersecurity team. Okay, thank you. And there's a question for the attendee. I'd like to know what the speakers think about the implementation of cybersecurity law in Malaysia, or the lack of it, and how it impacts the industry and the work they do. Any takers?
Well, it's definitely great to have laws in place, right, for something when it comes to security. But the problem is, if you have laws that are not enforced, then it's a problem. So I think what we should be seeing is a lot more enforcement. I do not, again, this is just based on my experience, I've not seen a lot of organizations or government taking any action on certain cases or certain big incidents that we've seen in the past, even though there are laws in place for it. So yes, you do have laws, but if it's not implemented, it defeats the purpose. So yeah, I mean, I think that, I hope that answers. How does it impact the industry? It really depends on the industry you are in, I guess. So certain industries may not have any, may not necessarily operate here in Malaysia. You might have a base here, but you're operating in different countries. So the laws may not apply to you. As an example, let's say, like in Malaysia, for instance, you have the PDPA law, PDPA requirements, and you have, I think there's another security law. But yes, but I don't see them getting enforced as much as they should.
All right, thank you.
I would agree with that. I mean, there's we do have this beautiful strategy for 2020 to 2025. I think that's our national cybersecurity strategy. It's actually really well thought out. It's got key pillars in it. But it's also how do you get both private and public organizations to commit to it and actually enforce it, right? That's always sort of, it's the same thing that you see in a smaller organization versus trying to do it nationwide. I also think we face this very interesting dilemma of how Malaysian culture in general is super online, like hyper online, hyper viral, and loves to just share information, right? So part of that problem of enforcement is also being able to educate people that it's not okay to share information just like that, right? And it's a common problem in other countries as well. But I think in particular, we face that that challenge of being hyper connected, and that impacting the way that people behave at work and how they behave with their own personal information, and how they protect their own information as well, right? So there are certain parts of it, I think, that the enforcement definitely can improve, but I also think there is difficulty around that because of the way that we behave as a community, and how we work as public-private partnerships, right? Like how do we push enforcement in the private sector versus how we do it in the public sector? Like a great example is with everything that's happening with the Palestinian situation. I think a lot of people were aware of threats that were coming out as a result, and you only had to go to one government website and see stuff happening, right? When it's already at that point, if we can't get the basics in place, it's going to be hard to push it to the rest of the country. So it's an uphill battle. I think the fact that we actually have a forward-thinking strategy is amazing. Like that's a huge first step. So now the question is, how do you as organizations come together to actually drive that in our own practices, and in the public sphere? I know that in the Ministry of Education at one point was actually trying to push for digital citizenship and really understanding your responsibility as a digital citizen. There are steps that we're taking, I think, but we can certainly improve. There's like so much more that we could do in that space.
Okay, thank you, Ryan and Nigel. One question from attendees before the event was, what is the next evolution in cybersecurity in times of pandemic and uncertainty? So I think some of you touched on this a bit, because we are now online all the time.
Well, I think, So yeah, given that we are working from home with the pandemic, always on own devices and things like this, I do see that your threat vectors, your attack surfaces, all this has changed now, or is going to continue changing. And if when people are working from home, you would be using, say, for example, your own devices, right? May not have the same level of security that an organization provided device might have. So these are new challenges that you would be seeing. So yeah, this is definitely something that if we continue in the same path, right, we would have to kind of adapt to it and make immediate changes. So this is something that would have to definitely, I mean, this pandemic has definitely triggered people to start thinking in this area, or start looking into new avenues, like, working from home, working remotely. How do we improve all these things now? I think, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question. What kind of software tools are usually used in company environments in this scope of area? So this is pretty general. I guess you can just pick on one field and then comment what are the tools you usually see in that company. So either Rahayu or Nigel.
Well, software tools, it really depends, because there's no one tool that does or solves a problem, right? And when it comes to security, if you think about it, right, as a hacker, or anyone who, as a criminal, cyber criminal hacker who's breaking in a system, they don't limit themselves in terms of what tools they use. So why limit ourselves when we want to use something? So yes, I don't really see any need to limit ourselves in a particular tool. So it really depends on what you need the tool for. So as an example, let's say you are getting into pen testing, right? But you want to test a particular application. You don't necessarily need one tool to break into this or test it. You can use multiple tools to test. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, it's a very generic question, so it's difficult to answer it.
I agree. But I like how you commented that a hacker is not limited by his tools. So you might as well, you have to keep learning on the job. All right. So before we close, I guess I would like to ask, if you could turn back time, will you still choose the same path? This question is for all of you.
Well, for me, yes, definitely. Maybe some minor tweaks here and there, but definitely yes, because when I started on my journey, I did know that I want to get into security. So it's just that I didn't start with security. I moved with a very general technology background, right? So yes, would I make some changes? Maybe some minor changes, but I would still continue the same path, I think.
Okay. Sandra?
I think my experience is definitely different compared to Rahayu and Nigel in terms of hands-on. But of course, I would say I'm very much happy that I chose this path and got the chance to learn a lot about cybersecurity. Yeah, I would not change anything. So far, it's good, and it has been a wonderful journey in learning what's happening in this world, and it's very, very interesting to know a lot of things that's currently happening and working in Malaysia. So it's really a great path to go for. And this is something that usually we would not really say so much out there, but in terms of salary as well, I think you guys will have a good future in mastering yourselves in this space. It's a really rewarding space, but I believe it comes with a lot of effort and a lot of time as well. So yeah, it's a good thing to do in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I would say if anything, I wish I started a little bit earlier, but I think maybe, the experience that I had kind of got me to this point where I'm actually really happy where I am, because I think cybersecurity in and of itself, there's a lot of work behind it, but it's a fascinating and really dynamic field, right? Like somebody was mentioning that no 2 days are the same. That's part of it. The fact that you can just go online and read so much about it. There's so much information out there that you're constantly learning. If you're looking for a 9-to-5 job, like, don't join cybersecurity. That's not how this area operates, right? But if you're looking for something that will constantly urge you to keep learning, stay on top. If you love reading, this is a space that will keep you on your toes for a while. So I'm really happy that I managed to land here. And like Nigel, I had no idea I was going to do this to begin with. But when I realized what I could do there, I haven't looked at anything else. Like I want to do this for a while. So yeah, definitely wouldn't change anything at this point.
I'm loving how all of you are so happy with your jobs. Okay, so what is your final, any advice or suggestions you have for someone interested in kickstarting their cybersecurity career? If there's one thing you want everyone to take away from today about kickstarting their career, Nigel?
Sure. Well, if you think about it, right, 15, 20 years at the back, 15, 20 years ago, security wasn't relevant. Now it's really relevant. So I think it's definitely a great area to be in. In terms of takeaway, I think you really need to be passionate about it. You really need to spend a lot of time, in dedication. You need to be dedicated to understand these things, understand the basics well, and then slowly start building yourself from there. I think in terms of takeaway, yeah, I would say you definitely need to be passionate. You definitely need to have dedication, and you need to put the time in there. But yes, it's rewarding and satisfying if this is something you're looking for.
Okay.
I'll add on to that as well. I think one key takeaway that would be helpful for everyone is like what we mentioned earlier, identifying exactly what you are passionate about, what you would be happy to do. I think when you are happy and you are always upscaling yourself, I think that's one of the key things that you need to probably keep motivating yourself to you're changing your phone on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis. So as the same thing goes for yourself. If you are evolving in your career, you might need to keep reading, keep doing a lot of, putting a lot of effort for yourself to, to protect what you're supposed to do, right? So that's something that I would add on to that, what Nigel mentioned.
Yeah, definitely agree with both Nigel and Sandra. It's at the end of the day, it's super rewarding, but it's a time commitment, right? And it's one of those things that because it's an evolving space, you got to evolve with it. So if you're happy to do that, you're gonna find the work that you put into it is gonna be worth the output.
Okay, awesome. And that ends our panel session for today. So I'll just like to ask if everyone could just turn on your cameras so we could take a group photo and then we can end. And I think, Brianna, are you there? Can you help us to take the photo?
Boleh. Yeah.
Thank you. Just let us know when you're starting to take the photo so people are not like, oh, I'm in the middle of...
Let me get into a... Okay. Everyone, please turn on your video if you have not, because soon, only if you want to be shown. Okay, so I'm going full screen. Sorry, let me stop the recording first. Otherwise, you'll be seeing everyone's
Okay.
screen.